When I first saw Guilty Gear Xrd, I thought it looked pretty sick, but I was also pretty intimidated. Other anime fighters had me completely lost, getting comboed for like an hour, and people spoke of Xrd like it was some hardcore anime bullshit. So imagine my surprise when I finally tried Guilty Gear Xrd and I never had an easier time picking up a fighting game. I'm not kidding. Character kits, basic combos, and most importantly, decisions with intentionality. It all came in a smooth process. A few sessions in and I was already making my own combos and using roaming cancels without any kind of guide or training. Needless to say, I do not agree at all that Guilty Gear is this hardcore only game, but rather pretty accommodating. First I want to talk about real quick what makes a fighting game hard, because generally the challenge provided is your understanding of the game and your opponents. Challenge from opponents is weird because that'll fluctuate and is more of a matchmaking issue if anything. Someone who's been playing longer than you beating your ass is mostly not a game design problem. That's something in like any activity you can do ever. You getting your ass beat by someone who's way better isn't the problem. The problem comes when you can't even understand why. And this is where the design aspect comes in and where we dip into the challenge that comes from the game. Now this video is mainly about the gameplay design, so I'm not going to really touch on the historical lack of good tutorials and single player content in fighting games, but as a general rule of thumb as I criticize these games, yes, they should have those, and stop confusing the lack of those with a problem with the combat design. Please. Anyways, challenge that comes from the game is understanding what you're picking up. What's your character's goals? What does your character demand? Or even how do these things play out at a higher level? This is the mountain of difficulty the game creates, and really there's no reason why it should be hard to scale. In other games, they take the time to use their mechanics and something like level design to present ideas, giving you space to be introduced to concepts and inform your play. Like, Mega Man is a classic example, with levels that introduce a mechanic in a controlled environment to interact with, and then challenges involving said mechanics later, while harder, aren't an annoying trial and error that fails to reward the understanding it gave you, and you know what? It feels fucking good. You know what we call games that fail to do this? Bad games. Now this might seem like a bad example because after all, fighting games generally aren't in the setting of traversing a level. The depth and fun comes from the player-to-player interaction that takes place in a very basic arena, as much as that might vary. But looking past your understanding of fighting games, please remember that fighting games are still video games, ones you have to pay for in fact. Games with an idea and experience to get across no matter how simple. An experience is more than just a mass of mechanics, and fighting games are not exempt from this. It is very possible for them to convey concepts effectively, and it has been done before. I'd also wager that one of those examples is Guilty Gear. I'll mainly be talking about Accent Core Plus R as I've played it the most, but I'll touch on the other games too. Not the first one. That is a very silly game. Anyways, there's already a decent amount of things in these games that are pretty nice for newcomers. Xrd has a simple and wonderful tutorial for what you need to know. Gatlings are an easy non-command way to do some satisfying stuff. There's awesome characters, awesome music. Crazy and interesting stuff. Everything short of jingling keys in your face. Fighting games actually tend to be top class at this, and it is a very important aspect, but the thing that really does it is how it builds on character ideas. Venom is a great example. His moveset is based on billiards, so his moveset has him literally hitting billiards. And I don't mean that he has a fireball and it's a billiard, I mean you place a billiard and you hit it. You do a quarter circle back and then you just hit it. The command is simple, it's introducing his experience and what makes him fun, which is the first thing you should understand before any combo or tech, where you'd have to stop playing the game, go into training mode, or look up in something outside of the game, something you shouldn't have to do in any game just to get a base understanding. Instead, it's a clear idea that it builds upon by designing moves around it. Oh damn, kinda like the challenges in a Mega Man level. And you know what? It feels fucking good. Acting as a natural progression of understanding as you play with the character's moveset. It gives you context to make game plans as and against said characters. I want to use my billiards to control my opponent versus I have to get around these billiards. And the back and forth responses to these game plans are a lot more understandable even if the mix-up game is still present. It's a little more tangible and less vague than, God, this character's jumping every punch is so good. To be honest, this is something a lot of fighting game characters struggle with. What do you mean you didn't think the Muay Thai character would throw fireballs? Like, most characters are fun, but sometimes learning them is kind of fucking dumb. It's certainly not a reason to ignore conveying ideas properly. Doing so almost makes even plus R seem simple. Or you know what? Here, let's replace the word simple. No, we don't want fighting games to be simpler. We want them to be more concise. I mean, as anything would want their ideas to be. It allows its ideas to be conveyed efficiently. A problem I have with Street Fighter V with its V system is that it feels like wasted motion. Like these should just be special moves, but are instead done in this roundabout way without a good distinction as to why. This one straight up was a special move. Yeah, the ton of moves in Guilty Gear characters seem daunting, but when you have a proper foundation to look at them from, that's much less of an issue. They're tools to describe a central idea, and in different ways accommodate different playstyles, allowing players to express themselves and satisfy what they found by playing. With Venom, if you want to rush down, zone, or set play, because that's what you found in using the billiards, there's moves for you. And you can see this all over with characters like Eddie, Bridget, Answer, Ramlethal. I'd also say it's a little harder for someone to systematically beat down on you when you pull some shit that no one would have thought of. It's like when a Mega Man level gives you a vertical slice of its mechanics before giving you harder. Yeah, I don't think I need to do that anymore. But I will say this one more time. It feels fucking good. My first time playing Plus R, I took Venom's idea of hitting billiards to make a simple game plan, and even against players much better than me, we still both had fun and were fulfilled because the experience behind our characters was always clear and present, win or lose. And you know what? I even managed to snag a few wins. It rewarded our understanding and was fulfilling. And you know what? It felt fucking good. I think one of the things that scares new players the most isn't the difference in skill or tech skill, but rather the burden of intentionality. Being able to make decisions with intentionality is one of the ways a player interacts with an experience. The truth is, most of you who don't think you can ever play a fighting game, you probably can, and even get kinda decent. And the hurdle isn't skill, it's filling in the blanks of what you'd even want to be doing. Finding that intentionality is a task on its own and takes its own effort. Is the skill of better players intimidating? Sure, absolutely, but that's much more softened when the player has the foundation to learn and make a purposeful attempt at overcoming a challenge. If Strive's shown me anything, this is a big thing. When Strive was first making rounds, it seemed that newcomers were more receptive to the idea that better players would mess them up, but to them they were able to see what was cool about the game and played it anyways. But Sephi, Plus R still has a lot in it. It can be very crazy and daunting, plus the inputs are more strict. No, yeah, that's completely understandable. I don't have a problem at all with playing a fighting game because it has less stuff. I hate to break it to you that Plus R's things is still good design and it's still fun, but I get the barrier of entry opposed to a more simpler experience, and I'm always for inputs not being unnecessarily obtuse. I hate that shit. However, if you think that same simplicity justifies its gameplay issues, that is extremely shallow to say the least. Here's the thing. You want to know why I think Strive is harder to learn? Because its simpler movesets and less moves don't describe a central idea as well and have less tools to do it. Ramlethal is a good example, as in Exard, despite her mishmash of a moveset, there's still the very tangible goals of effectively placing swords and effectively getting around them. But in Strive, a lot of her strength comes from big hitboxes and pressure that has unclear answers, or at least not until you go into training or look for outside information, which isn't credit I can give to the game. Having good training options, while nice, is not a substitute for conveying a clearer experience. Strive is simpler, but it's much less concise. The movesets are unelaborative. And it could be hard for the game to inform a sense of intentionality or give context for an understanding to reward. Hitting people feels good, you drain the other person's life to win, sure, but that hardly alone scratches the surface of what makes the gameplay interesting. Why do you hate dumbing down, fighting game player? Please don't think I'm saying Strive is a bad game, or that I'm judging you for liking it. I just think that Strive fits this example. I think the whole simple thing is very misrepresented. Like, if you think being simpler means the skill gap is bridged and you won't be getting picked apart in the corner by someone better, you're out of your mind. Alpha 2 doesn't have long combos, it doesn't even have a dash. Besides a custom combo system, Alpha 2 is pretty simple, but you'd be insane to say that this game's easy or lacks depth. There's a little bit of a discrepancy on the general view of simplicity. And I think it's a little ridiculous that simplicity is still being used this way, man. Like, have we not talked about this ad nauseum for years? And I know someone's gonna bring it up, so well, the game's just not for you. You might not mind these flaws, but it's still worthy of criticism. But also, players get too good. Match making. Stop stigmatizing depth in player expression. And here's the kicker. Simplicity isn't even a bad thing on its own. Strive doesn't have problems because it's simple. It's because its simplicity isn't done well. There should be simple fighting games. Because, well, not all fighting games are in hyper-fantastical settings where Faust is 9 feet tall. He is fighting a guitar witch by taking his fucking head and throwing it as a bomb. So yeah, some fighting games aren't gonna have the luxury of designing shit like Guilty Gear characters. But it begs the question, what do those simpler games do? Well, first off, some games have a more core idea between the whole cast. This is something that actually is pretty unclear about older Guilty Gear games. Like, some people joke that each character is their own game, and yeah, that can add some barriers. But with a universal core idea, you can give goals that doesn't vary between character. With mechanics like Strive Roman canceling where, okay, I'll just RC my big move into another, or even standardized combos like in Marvel where, oh, I haven't played this character before, I'll just 1-2-3 on the ground, 1-2-3 in the air. And if that doesn't work, I can still use that framework to think, how can I get to where I can 1-2-3 blah blah blah. I mean, Marvel's not really simple, but this is still a good example. I would also love to talk about the drive gauge in Street Fighter 6 because it seemed like it'd be a perfect example of this, but that game isn't out yet and I haven't played it, so fuck. Characters can give context based on how they can relate to something like this, but it makes situational design really important. If you look at Sagat in Street Fighter Alpha 2, he's rather simple, but it doesn't stop his buttons from having clear purposes. He's not as good as zoning like Ryu, and he doesn't have the aggression of other characters, but his kicks being really long and applicable help enough to paint a picture of his strengths and weaknesses. Little things like that can go a long way. This gets pretty subtle, and it might sound limiting, but having this can act as a foundation for how you allow for player expression in between. Like a move knocking you back when blocked to create just enough time to make something like a grab reactable, but still practical. Forcing more educated guesses and allowing players to fill in the blanks with their own now informed intentionality. Or you could just be a fucking gorilla. And while this is something that's kinda mandatory for simple fighting games, it's something that even a game like Plus R should do. And it does. In less gimmicky characters like Jam or Potemkin, you can see it pretty clearly. And the more concise you design your moveset around its idea, the more clear these things become. Simplicity can do this kind of thing. Simple doesn't inherently mean easier with less depth, and complex doesn't inherently mean harder with more depth. They're just different ways to handle your presentation. Them's Fightin' Herd's movesets aren't super complicated, but it doesn't stop the game from being really dynamic. And it has the accessibility of having less to learn, but still has a lot of depth, and I fucking love it. And Strive has complex things in it, believe it or not, like Nago Blood Rage, but in what I think is the true heart of Strive's simplicity, makes it more results to play around rather than varied choices. Which definitely for something like an install, where you have to recontextualize your already varied moveset on the fly, cuts down the burden of intentionality, which, as I've been trying to describe, is the biggest challenge of trying to get into, well, to be honest, many things. It just goes to show the many interesting and cool ways fighting games can be designed to convey their experience, and I wish it was recognized more. I really believe that failing to get across a smooth experience or concise idea is one of the biggest reasons why fighting games are so niche. We all put up with shit in these games that we don't need to. I genuinely think that Guilty Gear XX Accent Core Plus R, hold on, I need to catch my breath, was way ahead of its time, and still kind of is. And it bothers me that people only ever look at it in Exart as just crazy anime bullshit and nothing more. The way Strive has made people talk about these games, I will never forgive it for. Here's the thing. No matter how simple you make your game, it's hard to really get people to want to play your game when they're not sure how it's meant to be played. While we're asking for things in other genres like just being fucking functional, we should look for some design aspects too. Fighting games aren't inherently harder than other competitive genres, but other genres also treat themselves like games, and not criticized in this bubble. I want to see these things talked about more, and hopefully fighting games will stop just being good fighting games to people, but good games. Cause you know what? That would feel fucking good. Now, there's other things you can probably add to this, like single player content, but I think I covered what I wanted to. But I got a few words, so if you're one of the few people who's actually seen my videos and might have noticed, hey, haven't you made this video before? Yeah, I have, but I wasn't satisfied with it, and I really wanted to make sure I was concise and effective in explaining all this stuff, and to be honest, I feel pretty vindicated about my decision. Anyways, you can find me elsewhere. I do art and stuff, and I got more ideas of what I want to do, but I also got other stuff to do, so who knows when I'll do this again.